slightly over boldly said, oh, I'm gonna make a whole 45-minute song cycle and they're gonna be performed together eventually. Inspiration was coming across Rebecca Smash's poetry collection, which is called Witch. I read it in 2019 and I started having sort of dreams of the poems in the book, these sort of concepts of embodying the witch, or sort of groups that sort of covens around me, which was sort of both exciting and almost empowering, but also a bit spooky. And I kind of liked that playfulness between it being, because they're poems, it's sort of playing with the history, but also with the folklore and with this concept of like, what would someone who was the archetypal outsider see in the world that we wouldn't see? And so that was like the original spark for the concept. There are a set of shorter poems in this collection, which are in the form of spells. And the two new ones are a spell for change and a spell for the witch's hammer. So the spell for change it's sort of quite geothermal, tectonic. It's sort of conjuring images of the earth and beauty and fear together, of, you know, our own earth falling apart. But it's the way I've set it is in some way quite distanced from the energy and fear of that. It's quite an intimate song. It's almost entirely solo harp and mezzo, whereas the rest are more large ensemble and singer. And then the other one is Spell for the Witch's Hammer. So the Witch's Hammer, or the Hammer of Witches, is a reference to the Malleus Maleficarum, so that's like the translation, which was from the 1500s, time a disgraced monk called Heinrich Kramer. He wrote this demonology treatise, and demonology treatises were quite fashionable at the time, but in his, it's really obsessed with the demonology of witches, and he really identified witches as female, and he made it very sort of dark and sexual, and had all these, like, he clearly had some weird fears and fantasies that he's projecting onto this concept of a witch. The treatise is, you know, how to identify a witch, what horrible things she might be doing, how to torture and punish her, or you know, how to kill her. And he published this with essentially a fake Pope seal on it, not that long after the invention of the printing press, which was of course this wild new medium that nobody really knew how it was going to affect the world. And for the next 200 years, it was one of the best-selling, or the most widespread books after the Bible. I think it was like number 2 after the Bible for 200 years. And so many thousands, some people say hundreds of thousands, we don't really know, of women were killed around Europe, often quite directly linked to the publication of that book. So it's quite a strange, dark bit of history. So the Spell for the Witch's Hammer is in some way conjuring, playfully almost taking ownership of some of the images that he says that witches do, and then turning it around, and in the end the last 3 lines are, the witches eat your book, then you, then everything. So they sort of, you know, tear it all apart. And that is the final song in the whole song cycle, and it's also the only one which is for all 3 of the singers together, so it's a trio. A couple of like little moments that stand out were working with Eloise the first time on Spell for Joy and her first performance of it. She telling me that she felt that the spell worked for her, and that she felt completely joyous for like 2 weeks after performing it, which was amazing to hear. Working on Spell for Reality, so it was a commission from Ollie Zefferman, the conductor for Academy of St Martin's in the Fields, and Julia Bullock sang the premiere. But it was a video premiere because we were during lockdown, and she was recorded in her home away from the ensemble, and I was of course completely by myself writing, and just writing a spell that was sort of meant to conjure a sense of reality and connectedness while being so in these sort of quiet, empty days was quite a sort of beautiful, weird experience. Yeah, the most recent ones, Spell for Change and Spell for the Witch's Hammer, being in New York, being sort of away from home, writing in a different place, and the sort of energy of that city and the vibrancy, I think you can hear, especially in Spell for the Witch's Hammer, you can hear that. I came across Rebecca Tamash and her collection, which, because I think right after it was published, a couple of other poets that I worked with before and actually follow on social media were tweeting about it. So something as mundane as that, but it kept popping up on like every sort of social media that I was looking at. I think it was A.K. Blakemore that I saw her post about it first, and maybe Jack Underwood. Each of the poems I've looked for where the moment of magic or transformation might lie. So in the Spell for Lilith, Lilith is the archetypal first woman in some ancient folklore, including ancient Jewish folklore, and there's some mentions of her in like really early Babylonian and Sumerian texts, I think. It's the idea that she was created at the same time as Adam instead of Eve, and that she refused to be subservient to Adam, and so she left the Garden of Eden and was given the option to either return to the Garden of Eden and submit, or to become a demon, and she chose to become a demon instead. And then Eve was created. So there's this sort of old folklore. The way that Rebecca writes that spell is to almost flirt with her. You're summoning Lilith. But right at the end, there's this transformation in the song where suddenly, rather than this summoning, you're mentioning this idea that there's this whole world out there that where Lilith is still her. The music and the poetry sort of transform into this much more ethereal world. So quite often each of the spells has a moment of transformation, which I've sort of looked for in the music and shaped the music around that. Some of the other poems, like Spell for Sex or Spell for Joy, are more this collaging, building up, and so it's more this sense of momentum through the song that creates the moment of magic. So that's kind of how it's structurally affected the pieces. When I first set out to write it, I thought maybe I'll be able to write a couple of song cycles and connect them together. Actually, after the premiere of Spellbook Volume 1, so the first 3 spells, they were done in Cambridge, and right afterwards I gave a talk to the students there. In the Q&A, I sort of slightly over boldly said, oh, I'm gonna make a whole 45-minute song cycle and they're gonna be performed together eventually. Obviously, I had no confirmation that this was ever going to happen or commissions to make it happen, but I feel really, I suppose, proud that over the years that is actually what's happened. This sense that there was this power in this different perspective that the poems have and that I could dive into through my music, and that power of seeing the world in your own way would be something that I could embody through spending time inside these poems, inside the music, and I think I have.